Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison, and Catherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
There's a moment many people reach in divorce when they realize something uncomfortable. They just didn't lose their voice at the end of the marriage. They slowly gave it up along the way, piece by piece, just to keep the peace. Welcome back to We Chat Divorce, brought to you by My Divorce Solution. I'm Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison, helping you navigate divorce with clarity, structure, and confidence.
And I'm Catherine Shanahan, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst at MDS. Our work is about making sure that when it's time to negotiate, you're working from a clear, verified financial picture, not assumptions. And today's conversation is a reminder that the emotional clarity to use that information starts long before the settlement table. And you're going to hear us say that a lot, Karen. I feel like it's in our conversation with many clients the last few weeks.
Yeah, one of the biggest misunderstandings we see is the belief that silence is neutral, that staying quiet avoids conflict. We hear it every day, all day. I don't want to make my spouse upset. I don't want to incite him or her. And sometimes that's even coming from the therapist themselves, but not today. In reality, silence often comes with a cost, especially in relationships and divorce.
So if you're listening today and you're feeling unsure, if you're feeling stuck, or you're just hesitant to speak up, you don't need to decide anything right now. This conversation is about awareness, not urgency. And Karen, I like how the conversation went to acknowledging that many women in particular are living in silence. You know, we're so busy, we get through the day just to get through the day. And, you know, your spouse is working, so you feel like not that you're not working, but you're feeling like you can't ask questions that you're unclear about, especially, you know, questions that you perceive yourself to be not smart, you know, and most questions are because you are smart. Asking questions are very smart. And, you know, I hate the idea of someone just getting through life silently.
For sure. And I think Colette has a lot of assistance and help, because I think when people, and I was one of them, when you allow a relationship to kind of form this way and you allow yourself to go into self-abandonment, when you start to assert yourself, you could be seen as an antagonist. And so you really don't know how to navigate that. But Colette has it figured out, and I'm really, really excited to offer this resource to our audience. Yeah. So if you ever feel like you have disappeared inside your marriage or even inside your divorce, you'll want to stay with us for this conversation. Colette, welcome to We Chat Divorce.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're so glad you're here, for sure. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Me too.
So for our listeners, Colette is a licensed psychotherapist and nationally recognized relationship expert. She's the author of The Cost of Quiet, released February 3rd, 2026 through Putnam. So I'm sure we're going to be talking about that today for sure. She's also the co-host of the podcast Insights from the Couch and Love Thy Neighbor, and her TEDx talk Secrets of a Couples Therapist was selected as a TED Editor's Pick. What makes Colette's work especially meaningful for this audience and our audience is that it's rooted not just in professional expertise, but in lived experience. And by the time this episode airs, The Cost of Quiet will be available. Is it available now, Colette?
Yes, it's already out. Yeah.
That's wonderful. We can't wait to get our hands on a copy because the conversation touches on something so many women feel but struggle to name: how silence slowly becomes a survival strategy, especially as they approach major life decisions like divorce. So Colette, let's start at the beginning, where we always like to start. Can you please share your own divorce experience and how it became the catalyst for the work that you do today?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So it's very much what led to my career and my book. And I do share some of my personal story in the book too. That I got married, like so many of us, to someone I met very young. I met my ex-husband on the first day of school in college when I was 18. I was drawn to him immediately for many reasons. I found him very enigmatic and sexy, whatever that means to an 18-year-old. But like a moth to the flame, part of it was also unconsciously that he was very calm and very conflict avoidant. Now, I never would have used those words at the time, but I grew up in a household where my mom's an attorney, my dad's a doctor. I grew up in New York. I'm Irish Italian. There was a lot of arguing. Some of it was good, but my parents ended up getting divorced. And so the arguing in those years before their divorce was very turbulent and upsetting to me as a kid, as it is to so many children. And back then, we didn't have all this education about divorce. We weren't really tuned into the kids and what children go through in divorce the way we are now. That was the era of divorce being painted as War of the Roses and Kramer versus Kramer. These are movies that, younger people probably have no idea about, but where kids are the pawn, they go back and forth, right? Nobody's thinking about a child's emotional needs. So I have wonderful parents, but that wasn't the narrative back then. And unconsciously, I took away from that, and somewhat consciously, I want to have the most flawless, perfect, happy marriage when I grow up. And that looks like no arguing. So this is a big part of what drew me to my ex-husband. He grew up in a very Southern family where nobody ever raised their voice, but nobody really addressed anything either. And I didn't understand that at the time. So as I got into this relationship and ultimately marriage, we had what looked like the perfect life from the outside looking in: the 2 kids, the literal white picket fence, the matching SUVs, a black and yellow lab. I mean, you name it. And people would have told you we were the perfect couple, but there was tremendous emotional disconnection. And looking back, I didn't know how to do my part, which was to communicate. We ended up having a very difficult divorce where I had no career to fall back on. I came out of it with little financial resources, the need to find a career. My children were young. I found that there was a lot of judgment in our social circle toward me. Didn't feel very fair to me, but I think that's the reality for a lot of women, even in 2026. And I just was stunned. I didn't know how this had happened when it was the last thing I ever wanted. And it was not until we had a very bad experience in couples therapy on the brink of the divorce. We probably waited way too long to go, but we also had a couples therapist who wasn't properly trained and really didn't handle things ethically either. So this planted a seed in me that I could go back to graduate school, do this work for a living, help people either navigate divorce in a healthy way, because sometimes that's the right choice for a variety of reasons, or make the relationship work by learning how to have these hard conversations, to do it well, to get into our feelings and our fears, and invite greater emotional intimacy when that's possible and appropriate. And so that's what I've been doing for the past almost 15 years. And I wrote a book about this topic so other people don't have to suffer the way I did.
Yeah, the quiet world is a painful world. I'm Irish and Italian as well.
Oh, yay.
But, it wasn't, my parents never got divorced, but, my dad had a drinking problem, but you were never allowed to even talk about that outside your home. So you talk about divorce, who's going to talk about that? So I really agree with you there. And I also have a question, the yelling is one thing, but the Southerners just say, bless your heart. It means the same thing, but in a quiet tone.
Totally. And let me just say, you're spot on. Okay, I did not understand at 18 all that passive aggressive stuff that was going on beneath the veneer. I just thought, oh my gosh, nobody's raising their voice. I think it was just a nervous system issue at that point, and I hadn't yet connected to my own emotional needs as a woman. That's really where things went wrong in the marriage, is after I had kids. I had a very, very difficult labor and delivery experience with my first daughter where we both stopped breathing, had to be resuscitated. There was tremendous, we both almost died. And then on top of that, becoming a mother, I developed PPD with the anxious variety. So I was not, none of the psychosis and not like the sadness where I didn't want to engage with my baby, but just constant pervasive fear that something would happen to her. I couldn't rest, I couldn't sleep, and I'd been through all this physical ordeal. And suddenly I really needed my spouse emotionally, perhaps for the first time that I allowed myself to need him, and he wasn't there. And of course, my role was that I didn't know how to communicate what I was feeling and needing. So I also want to say, with respect to my book, which is called The Cost of Quiet, that quiet is really a euphemism for avoidance. Sometimes it's swallowing our words and not saying anything. Sometimes it's, oh, bless her heart, right? Instead of, here's what I feel and what I need. Sometimes it's yelling and bickering. Sometimes it's outsourcing our needs for connection to other people in our lives, to our children, to our hobbies, becoming a workaholic, to drinking. That can be an attachment figure that is triangulated in a relationship. So there are all these different ways that we avoid saying what needs to be said, which is what's more vulnerable, what's more true, being clear and direct. And really the key that I try to teach people now, both in the book and in my office, is that we've got to be more vulnerable, and at the same time, we have to be more assertive, more direct and forthright, which gets confused with aggressiveness. And it's not that. It's just being clear and kind.
Well, especially for women. And in our world, in the MDS life, particularly women, but, we do have a lot of men as well. They're afraid, they stay quiet about getting the information. They're afraid to ask for documents that they're entitled to. They're afraid to upset their spouse, that they're asking to verify numbers that they are giving them in a proposal. They're afraid to ask their attorney to dig a little deeper, like we're not clear on this. So their silence is very costly when it comes to negotiation. And we talk about being financially prepared all the time. And it's scary. I know a lot of married women who say they're happily married, which is great. I believe them. But they're afraid to ask their spouse, the information on the tax return. Can you explain this to me? What is a 1099? What is a K-1? What does that really mean to us? You don't really hear women sitting down and asking their spouse these questions. And I think it's the healthiest thing to do for a good relationship for yourself and for your partner, is to be on the same page in your marital state.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree. And, I would argue, at the risk of pissing people off, that if you're afraid to ask your spouse about these things, it's very human, and you're not as happily married as you think. That is a direct lack of emotional intimacy and emotional safety. It doesn't mean it's all your fault. These patterns are conditioned in us young, and we have the added layer as women that we've also been conditioned by a society that still values us for being small, needless, self-sacrificing, not rocking the boat, not upsetting anyone, not sitting with discomfort. So it's not that I don't understand that these things are hard, but this really is the primary challenge we have to overcome, not just in our relationships, but also for our own mental and emotional health. Addressing things directly is essential to living a good life, to being healthy. We know emotional suppression is linked to a host of physical diseases that can kill you: cardiovascular disease, autoimmune, the risk of stroke, irritable bowel syndrome. The list goes on. So if you're afraid to have that conversation, that's worth working on, because once you wake this emotional muscle up and you start to discover that these things we dread are worse in anticipation than in reality, and how good it feels when you actually do say, hey, this is super scary to bring up. I normally avoid these things, but I'd really like to talk to you about our finances. Can we sit down? And you start by acknowledging how hard it is. You're going to have a completely different trajectory in your life. You're going to feel more empowered, more confident, and be healthier, regardless of what happens in the relationship.
Oh, I think financial independence and financial clarity are the most empowering thing you could do, give yourself.
I agree. And when it comes to my story, I didn't say this part, but that was the hugest place that I messed up. I was afraid to have those conversations. I was married to someone who was a financial advisor. I had given up my career to stay home. I thought like this was the American dream, right? I don't have to worry about money. Well, I really shot myself in the foot because I should have come out of that relationship in at least a financially secure enough place to have some time to launch a new career. And I didn't. And in large part, it was because of exactly what you're describing. I was passive with my own attorney. Things didn't feel right, but I'm like, well, they're the experts. What do I know? And I see clients, and I'm sure you all do too, struggling with these same things, as you're saying, right? Where I didn't push back, where I didn't ask for answers. I still don't know what the real financial picture was or how it turned out exactly as badly as it did. But I got intimidated. And, I never want to be coming from a position of blame because it was up to me to advocate for myself. And I didn't know how to do that at the time. But, I think my ex-husband in his own pain, and this is just my view, a lot of times leveraged my fear. He would make threats about, well, one time, I'll just give one example. And again, this is like in a pain point. He's not a bad guy, so I'm not trying to throw him under the bus, but this was not a good thing to do. I was very emotional and distressed. And, my kids were 2 and 4. I have lived somewhere where I had no family around and I had no career. And the prevailing story, because I chose in large part to protect certain parts of the story for my children, for him, the prevailing story was that I left and he was the victim. And society does not look kindly on a young woman with young kids who walks out on her husband and the husband seems heartbroken and the wife doesn't. But nobody stopped to think that I might have had some good reasons for making that choice. Instead, it was like, oh my God, I'm so shocking and horrible. So someone started a rumor that I was on cocaine, which for the record, I've never done cocaine in my life. Despite going to a college where people did a lot of drugs, I was the only person that never did drugs other than alcohol. And so my ex-husband, there's just no way he could think that's true, in my opinion. But he confronted me, and this is 20 years ago, okay, but confronted me at a vulnerable time and said, I've heard you're doing cocaine. I'm going to take that to a judge, and I'm going to take the kids away from you.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, even though I know I'm not a drug addict and I'm like, I'm just stressed out and alone and I have no support, like what you're seeing is me being an emotional wreck, but I'm not doing drugs. I felt like he was going to use money and paint a false story. And it made me roll over and say, you know what? I don't even want money. Just like, please don't mess with me. I just want my kids. Like, I don't need anything else from you. Just please let me get a divorce and leave me alone. And I look back and I'm like, like that's where it started to go wrong. But I also have a lot of compassion for myself that I was scared that I was going to be manipulated.
Well, the resources that we have now, you didn't have, right? So even our process, our process is the birth of me going through a divorce, Karen going through a divorce, and then what we saw lacking in the system as a whole, right? And so, when you're out there and you're being, I get your feeling because I had the same thing, not cocaine, but I had, false rumors about myself. And I also had the threat he was going to take my kids. One was in college, the other one was in high school. I don't know where he thought he was going to take them. But, he had that threat because I was disrupting his lifestyle.
Right.
But what I want to say to people today is that if you're, of course they're doing their work with you. We don't do therapy. We only do financial clarity and preparation. But I always say, and Karen probably knows what I'm about to say, is find out what you know is rightfully yours in divorce.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you get too much, I will help you write the check back to your spouse. Because nobody has ever asked us to write that check back. Because even with someone threatening your kids, when you get the knowledge that that person can't take your children from you, sure, they can play mind games with your children and that's on them. But eventually, your children will see the truth. But you need to be financially clear on what you're giving up to keep your children. So when you say things like, I wish I would have known you, Colette, back then, because
I know, me too.
When people say things, yes, I just want my kids, and we still hear it today. We hear it often. I just want my kids. I don't care about anything else. I just really want my kids and I want to keep the house. Okay, great. That's what you want. And maybe that's what you'll get at the end. But know what's rightfully yours and look at it, what it really means to you, because your kids grow up very quickly and you need to financially protect yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be one of the hundreds of thousands of people that will stop us at lunch and say, I wish I would have known you then.
100%.
That's so true. And, Colette, just in your experience and mine and Catherine's experience, we all are and we're very attached to our children, right? So that's primary. And so when people go to an attorney to begin the divorce process and not obtain the financial clarity ahead of time, kind of separate and apart or ahead of that, everything becomes about all the triggers in your relationship that distracts from anything financial, right? Because that is the parenting plan, and the financial plan is essentially the result of divorce before the decree. And so had you had the opportunity, or had Catherine or I had the opportunity to understand the financial picture going in, and then you hire your attorney, and then you have to deal with all of the emotional trauma of it, at least you would always know what you were entitled to. So while you're having all these other emotional decisions and conversations, it didn't impact your ability to negotiate something for you and your children moving forward. And I think that is the whole mission of MDS. And then helping us understand what it's like in the quiet quitting. I think that is really emerging, and helping people understand that, to your point, giving yourself grace and the opportunity to do better, to do more as you're able to do better and do more is key to anyone starting the divorce process.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case, as often is the case, we would never actively seek unnecessary suffering. Much of this could have been prevented. When you look at it from the relationship perspective, what I can own is that I made the mistake of losing my voice. In an effort to keep the peace, things didn't seem like they went well when I brought stuff up. And I didn't know how to bring stuff up the right way. Again, why I wrote my book. And it applies to all relationships. It's not just romantic. So it's at the workplace, it's friendships, it's family. Like, as adults, we've got to be able to know how to say, hey, this hurt my feelings. Can we talk about it? And that's really scary for people. So that's the part I can own there. And then the biggest mistake of my divorce isn't that I left. It was the right thing. It wasn't a good relationship. There's a possibility, if we had gotten a lot of good help much sooner that also addressed our individual issues, that it might have been able to work out, but we would have needed a lot of change. And, you're not in control of whether someone else will do that. So I, first of all, want to validate that the decision to divorce is often the right thing. And I'm still on a mission to change that message in society, because even though so many people get divorced, there's no person on earth that doesn't know someone who's divorced, probably someone close to you. There's still a stigma out there. We're still living in the patriarchy, though we've made strides. And frankly, even though women file for 70% of divorces, it's still not an acceptable narrative on some level. It's still considered a failure, and it's just wrong. It doesn't speak to the emotional truth of people's lives. And you don't have to be being emotionally, verbally, or physically abused either to need or want a divorce. So I think that's the first thing. But to your point and the work you all do, my biggest mistake in the divorce wasn't the divorce. It was that I didn't get the financial clarity. I didn't get help with that part. I didn't prepare. And that's also when I'm working with clients, I work with a lot of people who are trying to decide whether to stay or go, which is so, so hard. There's so much fear. So much of this is emotional and not really practical. Maybe your life's going to be fine. Everybody's going to be fine, but it doesn't feel that way. And then really like trying to help them get plan, like a solid plan. And that begins with the clarity about the financial picture so that when those fears come for you, you're not hijacked by them as easily because you know what's so. You know what you're entitled to. You know, I think with the cocaine thing, that was tricky because if it's proven that you're a drug addict, I mean, you can lose your kids. And my children were babies. So that felt like this person has all the resources and I have none. And I'm going to get lied about. And like that could happen to me. Now, if I had more support in my life emotionally and logistically, people helping me understand the law, how they were going to help me show that that wasn't the case. At the end of the day, that was bluster he threw out in an emotional moment and it never went anywhere.
Yeah,
But I
most
went
stuff.
into a tailspin.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Right.
most stuff doesn't go anywhere. But I want to back up a little bit about the financial piece that you mentioned, and even with your clients.
Yeah.
My favorite client is the one who's thinking about it, and they come to our process because you're you're gathering what you do know, and you've been living probably the most. Well, let me just back up. I'm getting so like I get so heated up about this because women will come and say, I'm so sorry I don't know this information. I'm so sorry that I stayed home with my kids, which of course was the family agreement, but they're apologizing for the lack of knowledge that they feel that they have, right? And so when we start gathering information, just you can't just go to attorneys and get information from both sides because they have to file and they have a process they have to follow. We do not. We're not attorneys. So when we start even with your income and expenses and start getting helping them get documents that they do have access to, they become not so quiet anymore because we're communicating with them. There's an emotional value to your assets and the debts. There's an emotional value to your income and your expenses, even if you just know a little bit of all of it. And so I like when they come through our process so they start getting a little bit of reality. But more importantly, if they decide that they don't want a divorce, listen, I love marriage. Who knows? I'll probably get married for the third time, right? I'm a relationship girl and everyone that knows me knows that, right? But I want women to be independent and I don't want them to live in silence. I want them to be able to ask for a statement. I want them to be able to go through their tax return, if not with their spouse, with their accountant, who's ever filing it for you. And so when they come through our process, if they feel like, oh, I can get this information, maybe I do want to work on my marriage. Well, there's no better way to work on the emotional side with your therapist if you have financial clarity, because there's no way that you sit in marriage counseling at this point worrying about what your financial life could look like if you got divorced. How are you working on the emotional side? So to settle that through our process, we've been doing post-nuptial agreements where people have been just, they go and they say we're going to reconcile.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of them do come back and they get divorced. But you can't move on in life without having financial knowledge of your life.
Yeah. It's really true. It's so important. It's foundational. And it's a tragedy that so many women don't have that. That was the case for me. But the good news is sometimes you learn through suffering or struggle, through failure, right? And not that my divorce was a failure, but the mistakes I made. Now I've been remarried for 10 years, but I have separate finances, and I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but that for me, like I have my own business for a long time. I know every cent that comes in and out of my account. I love earning my own money. I realized for me, staying home was probably never the right choice, even if my marriage had been good. And I wouldn't have gotten here and be doing this meaningful work had I not bungled along the way. But not only do I see as a therapist how important financial clarity is, but I've lived it and I'll never be without it again, whether I get divorced again, whether I'm married, like knowing what's so feeling that you have control and agency over your finances. I mean, you just can't feel empowered if you don't have knowledge about your own life. So that even alone, and I'd never do it any other way.
Well, let me ask you this. So you have your separate accounts, which I'm all for.
Yeah.
Do you and your spouse come together and share that information throughout the year to make sure you have a healthy conversation about money?
Yeah, nothing's concealed. And in fact, so it's interesting. My husband is a CFO and he's a CPA by training, and he is very, I think originally I grew up in a family where like people made money and we spent money and it was very loosey goosey. And I grew up, unfortunately, the psychology of money is very powerful. And I grew up, unfortunately, thinking money grew on trees. It's not a flattering thing to admit about oneself. And it was really hard for me coming out of divorce because I just had no idea that the value of a dollar, how hard people worked for money, how hard it was to build a career where you make good money. I was like, I'm smarter than my ex-husband. I'll make my own money. Okay, well, that's noble and that's great. And I did it. But when I first started trying to develop a career, I was like, oh, shit, this is harder than I thought. Right? It sounds so naive. I mean, keep in mind, I was kind of young. I was 30 when I got divorced. Most of my friends weren't even married yet. They were still getting drunk at bars, dating in the city. Like, I just lived such a different trajectory to most of my peers. And I was kind of raised for this very cush removed life that was not my reality. So my husband and I are totally financially transparent, but he is Mr. Spreadsheet. He is so frugal. He's such a saver. His psychology of money, I don't love. I'll just be honest. It's very scarcity mindset. I'm like, you act like we're poor and we're not, like, but he grew up on a farm in rural Kentucky. His parents worked hard. They didn't make a lot of money. So we come from very different worlds and very different approaches to money. So we have to really blend our style and what works for us. We have total transparency. We know we come with different ideas. Like I'm going to pick a different hotel, ideally on a trip than he'd want to pick. But we meet in the middle, we compromise. Sometimes it goes one person's way. And I think I've brought more sense of joie de vivre, like joy for life to him. And he's really helped me to become very buttoned down. Like I don't have to blow $60 on Uber Eats when I have food in the fridge, like even simple things like that. So we have a joint account that we both contribute, and we are so literal. And again, I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but it works for us, where we contribute based on our incomes. Like, and the percentage has changed because my income is variable. We had a couple of years, we made the same thing. Generally, he makes more than me. So we contribute to the joint account based on the percentage of our incomes. We pay all our joint bills, our mortgage, our household, all that stuff out of there, vacations. And then the rest of the money, we do what we want with. And we're not accountable to each other, but we're considerate of each other. If I'm going to blow $5,000 on something, even if it's my own money, I'm going to tell him, hey, I'm thinking of buying this, and what do you think? But it works really well for us. And I do think there's something very different in a second marriage, third marriage, where you don't have children. I don't ever want to be in a relationship again where I feel like I'm the child and the other person makes the money and I'm just like happy to be taken care of. I could never do that again. That doesn't feel safe to me. And I love that I provide for myself and that we can contribute and share together. That feels good to me.
Well, the importance there is the communication and having the tough conversation. And that's the whole point, right? Don't be afraid to have the tough conversations. And in divorce, do not be afraid to require that you can verify this data before you make a decision. Don't do any premature negotiations until you have the information you need to make a really informed decision.
And this is why people need people like you. People need people like me, because it can take a lot of emotional work to have these conversations, especially if you've had a lifetime of self-silencing, right? Of not addressing hard things. I just got off a session with a client who was struggling to even address, she's dating, and was struggling to even ask the person when his divorce will be final, because it's just awkward and uncomfortable. And, you know, we can know, and she's a very intelligent woman. She knows logically that she needs to ask that, but it's hard. And you need support. You need support.
You do need support, and it's good she has you for that, because that's an easy question. Imagine the questions that will follow after that. So if you can't ask someone that you're dating that question, maybe you're not dating the right person. But, you know, I'm glad that they can work with you to get the courage to do that, because they're going to need to work with you to ask them some follow-up questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's such an internal process too, to your point. Sometimes, I mean, some people make it feel very unsafe to ask anything. So, you know, it's always both and between. But a lot of times these scripts are so deeply wired. They can even be personality, but they're so deeply wired in what's modeled for us in childhood, those unspoken family of origin rules. You know, this, you may be going through a crisis, and this is the first time you've had to actually have those hard conversations. And to your point, let's not let it go there. Develop this emotional muscle to address things before you're in crisis, so that when you do have to ask for financial documents as your life's changing, that's not such a huge leap, right? Because you're right. I would not have any trouble saying to someone, hey, I want to talk about your marital situation. I'm dating you. But for somebody else who's never plunged into those things, whose whole life has been about making other people feel comfortable at her own expense, that's a big ask. And you can't live a good life without the ability to do that.
You know, we could flip this too. Catherine, how often do we see the spouse who's making the money kind of band-aiding financially the other spouse from the very same space? I'm going to make this okay. I don't want to make my spouse upset, so I'm going to pay their premarital debt, or I'm going to make things work for us because I can and my spouse can't. Isn't that kind of in the same place of what we're talking about, only flipped?
Yeah, that's a really great point, because we hear it all the time. And as a matter of fact, that was my second marriage to some degree.
Yeah, that was my dad and my mom. Even though my mom had a law degree, my dad was a rescuer. I mean, it's psychological enablement.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, a lot of times, especially with the women who are supporting the male spouse, you know, they're the angriest that have to pay support, you know, because they're working, and, you know, a court will say to them, well, you allowed that to happen. You know, who allows that to happen except for yourself? And so, yes, Karen, to your point, you're living silently because you're just going to make it work. You know, life is moving on, and you've gotten yourself into that mess, and so you're going to make it work. But there has to come a time that you do not silently live like that, which is why I love the conversation about living silently. Because you know, you owe it to yourself to live the life that you want, because it's going fast. This life goes really fast.
Yes, that is so true. And when you get to this stage of midlife and you're really aware of it, as we're in kind of a sandwich generation, so many of us, you know, parents dying, getting sick, getting older, raising families. And how do you want these last years, however many were granted, to be? Right? We want to be empowered and connected to our voice, and what we're not advocating for ourselves is what we allow. And you don't have to be a jerk about it. I mean, I think this is the thing that I really want to impart to people, is that people tend to vacillate between suppression and silence, or some version thereof. And then they stack up all the resentments that they haven't voiced, and then they blow. And I call it victim volcano syndrome in my book. It's so common, right? You just can't take it anymore. Then you freak out. Maybe it's over a tiny thing, but it's the straw that broke the camel's back. And then often it gets flipped around as, look at the way you're behaving, man or woman, right? Like, how can you blow up like this? Or why are you so angry? What's wrong with you? And the legitimate grievance you have is never addressed. So we rely either on, I'm going to swallow it because I don't want to rock the boat. I made my bed. It won't matter. It's not worth it. And like, I can't take it anymore. And I'm filled with reactive emotion. And now I can't contain myself. What we want instead is to come from that place of power where we process with ourselves first. What's important here? Our emotions are guides to our needs. If you're angry, there's a reason. Anger is often a sign that something that's happening isn't okay and you need to take action, that something needs to change. We don't want to not pay attention to that and just compartmentalize it, but we don't want to erupt on someone and our message gets lost. We want to speak from our adult self on behalf of our anger to say, hey, this upset me. I feel angry. This is the message I'm getting. This is what I am and am not okay with, right? And then we can't control other people, but the sooner we have those conversations, the more we see what our relationship can and cannot offer us, and we can make wise decisions about whether something's salvageable, whether it meets our needs, or whether it's time to move on.
Yes, this is a great conversation. And as we close up here, to all of our listeners, you do not have to live in silence. This sounds like a great book to read to help you through that. And, it's your right to ask questions. And it doesn't mean you're questioning anyone if you're asking questions. So remember to do that. Conversations like this is exactly why we believe preparation really matters, emotionally and financially. So when you understand your patterns before negotiations begin, you can stop reacting from fear, which I know a lot of us live in, and start making decisions from clarity and confidence. So that's true whether you're reclaiming your voice in a relationship or you're understanding your financial reality. Before settlement is on the table, please do not go to settlement without understanding the financial reality of that.
Yeah, my parting words are, don't do what I did. But that's the beauty of now I'm able to help people do it differently. But I just want to cheer to everything you just said. That's it. And once you find your voice, even if it's uncomfortable and you start using it, you're not going to ever want to do it any other way.
100%. Colette, thank you for sharing your story and insight with us today. It's so impactful. The Cost of Quiet for all of our listeners is now available. So if today's conversation resonated with you, you're going to want to get a copy. Colette, where can everyone learn more about you, your work, and your new book?
Thank you so much for asking. So my website, ColetteJaneFair.com. Colette's with one L and Fair is F-E-H-R. Also, thecostofquiet.com. You can find my book on my website or there, or anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's everywhere. It is out now. And fortunately, it's doing really well. I think women are hungry for this. I mean, it's kind of for everyone, but I really wrote it for women. So, go grab a copy. No matter what your relationship situation is, it's going to help you find and use your voice.
Thanks again for a great conversation, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. If you want to understand your financial reality before negotiations begin, My Divorce Solution exists to give you that clarity. Through our MDS Financial Portrait, we organize and verify your complete financial picture, assets, debts, income, and settlement scenarios so you can make informed decisions before you ever sit down to negotiate. Visit mydivorcesolution.com for free resources to learn more. Visit mydivorcesolution.com for free resources and more information.
And know that I know for the three of us, and certainly I'll speak for myself, I have empathy if you're living in silence right now. So just take a breath and realize you're allowed to have your voice. So gather the information that you need. You're allowed to take the time, take a pause if you're in the middle of the process and you feel like you're not given the space to talk. You're allowed to reclaim your voice at your own pace.
So until next time, protect your peace and let clarity be your power. Thank you, Colette.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.